Glad you could join us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. The way the world manages land, produces and eats food has to change to cope global warming or food security, health and biodiversity will be at risk. A new United Nations report on the effect of climate change on land has said. Experts from 52 countries met to finalize the report, which should help to guide governments meeting later this year at a conference in Chile on ways to implement the 2015 Paris Agreement and avoid runaway climate change. Today on the program, we look at the issues raised in the Special Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report and the solutions some are adopting to tackle the problems. Do stay with us. With over 200 million people and an emerging middle class, Nigeria is witnessing a boom in demand for meat that offers potential but also risks for the semi-nomadic herders who provide most of its beef. According to government estimates, Nigeria consumes 360,000 tons of beef each year, accounting for half of all West Africa. In per capita terms, consumption is low compared with advanced economies, but it is growing fast and expected to quadruple by 2050. Today, most of the demand is met by pastoralists from the ethnic Fulani group, who follow time-honored techniques of raising cattle, driving them south to pastures and taking them to market. During the dry season, the herders come down from the arid Sahel to the fertile plains of central and southern Nigeria, seeking water and pasture for their livestock.
Sometimes I move with around 4, 5 or 6, while other times I go over there, buy and sell. If the market booms, I sell all. If not, I come back home with the rest.
The millennia-old activity has been thrust into spotlight in recent years because of worsening confrontations with farmers over access to land and water. Clashes have claimed around 7,000 lives over the past 5 years and cost the Nigerian economy about $13 billion.
We are doing this business for long, but for this time around, the time change what we see for the business is too difficult as we are doing it before. Before, everywhere is too quiet, which means that not any big problem. But now the main problem between all these Fulani and buyers and the town people bring us so much problem for the business.
Experts say the friction has roots dating back more than a century. Drought, population growth, the expansion of farming into communal areas, but also poor governance have all played a role. Nigeria has considerable livestock, nearly 20 million cattle, 40 million sheep, and 60 million goats. But about 30% of slaughtered animals are purchased abroad, mainly from neighboring Cameroon, Chad, Mali, and Niger. Often the herds are driven for hundreds of kilometers to be sold at border markets. The animals are then trucked to the cities where they are sold again, slaughtered and butchered.
As of 5 years ago, we used to buy cow like 250, 200, 150. But the largest one, 250. But now those ones we used to buy 150 before. We bought it at the length of 250 now. We bought it at the length of 300. The one we used to buy 250 before. We bought it at the rate of 400, 350, 500.
I and my family have decided to use fish, to eat fish. To when the price of the fish, the meat is lesser.
The root of the ongoing conflict between herders and farmers and how it affects food security is one of the issues laid out in the latest report on land by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Drylands and areas that experience desertification are also more vulnerable to climate change and extreme events, including droughts, heat waves, and dust storms, with an increasing global population providing further pressure. The report highlights that climate change is affecting all 4 pillars of food security. The first being availability, that is yield and production, then access, which deals with prices and ability to obtain food, then utilization, that is nutrition and cooking, and then stability, which is described as the disruptions to availability.
We humans affect more than 70% of ice-free land, A quarter of this land is degraded. The way we produce food and what we eat contributes to the loss of natural ecosystems and declining biodiversity. When land is degraded, it reduces the soil's ability to take up carbon, and this exacerbates climate change. In turn, climate change exacerbates land degradation in many different ways. Today, 500 million people live in areas that experience desertification. People living in already degraded or desertified areas are increasingly negatively affected by climate change.
The report finds that there are ways to manage risks and reduce vulnerabilities in land and the food system. It says global meat consumption must fall to curb global warming, reduce growing strains on land and water, and improve food security, health, and biodiversity. Although the report stopped short of explicitly advocating going meat-free, it called for big changes to farming and eating habits to limit the impact of population growth and changing consumption patterns on stretched land and water resources. Plant-based foods and sustainable animal-sourced food could free up several million square kilometers of land by 2050 and cut between 0.7 and 8 gigatons a year of carbon dioxide equivalent. The IPCC believes land can be both a source and sink of carbon dioxide, the main greenhouse gas blamed for global warming, and better land management can help to tackle climate change. But it is not the only solution, and cutting emissions from all sectors is essential to quickly curtail global warming. Since the pre-industrial era, land surface air temperature has risen by 1.53 degrees Celsius, twice as much as the global average temperature, put at 0.87 degrees Celsius, causing more heat waves, drought, and heavy rain, as well as land degradation and desertification. Human use directly affects more than 70% of the global ice-free land surface, and agriculture accounts for 70% of freshwater use. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use activities accounted for 23% of total net man-made greenhouse gas emissions during the period between 2007 and 2016. When pre- and post-production activity in food system are included, that rises to up to 37%.
Climate change creates additional stresses on land, exacerbating existing risks to livelihoods, ecosystems, species, and biodiversity. Near-term actions to promote sustainable land management will help reduce the loss of biodiversity also through restoring natural ecosystems and their capacity to store carbon. Indigenous and local knowledge can contribute to overcoming the combined challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, food security, desertification, and land degradation.
Last year, the IPCC's first special report warned that keeping the Earth's temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius rather than the 2 degrees Celsius target agreed under the Paris Accord required rapid change across society. The IPCC warned of more disruption to global food chains as extreme weather becomes more frequent due to climate change, and said environmental costs should be factored into food. It projects a median increase of 7.6% in cereal prices by 2050, meaning higher food prices and increased risk of hunger. While an estimated 821 million people are undernourished, changing consumption habits have already contributed to about 2 billion adults being overweight or obese.
A move to more balanced diets could help us adapt to and limit climate change. Some diets require more land and water and lead to higher emissions than others. For example, diets that are high in grains, nuts and vegetables have a lower carbon footprint than those that are high in meat, and they lead to better health outcomes. But of course, dietary choices are influenced by local production practices and cultural habits.
Experts say nutrition is highly susceptible to changes in climate and bears a heavy burden as a result, as seen in the impaired nutrient quality and dietary diversity of foods produced and consumed, the impact on water and sanitation, and the effect on patterns of health risks and disease, as well as changes in maternal care childcare and breastfeeding.
That there are fewer stunted children in the world. That's good news that we should all celebrate. But there are significant disparities between regions, and sub-Saharan Africa has been left behind. We also need to work harder to reduce anemia in women and to arrest the obesity epidemic.
The situation is more pressing in sub-Saharan Africa, where an estimated 23.2% of the population, or between 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 5 people in the region, may have suffered from chronic hunger in 2017.
It is now proven that achieving SDG goals by 2030 requires taking things to the next level. That's say to intensify and focus our responses on what actually works and to increase our sustainable investments in rural transformation.
In recent years, extensive droughts in sub-Saharan Africa have led to famines. Extensive flooding in Southeast Asia has caused widespread loss of crops and livestock. These two extremes, experts say, are hallmarks of climate change, and they are set to become even more severe in the years ahead, leading to greater food insecurity as the global population gets larger.
But climate impact is real. 22 to 23 million people alone were impacted and forcibly displaced because of change in climate. Because every 5 seconds, a child is dying from starvation. And when there's $300 trillion worth of wealth in the world today, that's unacceptable and it's inexcusable.
While 0.5 degrees Celsius increase in room temperature is unnoticeable, the climate scientists say heating the world that much will have substantial consequences whose impact will be felt across human communities and economies.
Climate change is already visible, and it's having impacts on human beings, ecosystems all around the world, and we can still limit the warming to 1.5 degrees, but we should change many things how we run our everyday business today. One of the major issues is that there would be 420 million people less suffering because of climate change if we would be able to limit the warming to 1.5 degree level, and we have certain areas in the world which are extremely sensitive. It's the small island states, Mediterranean region, and also sub-Saharan Africa, which are already suffering and will suffer the most in the future. This is our challenge. We produce today 85% of the global energy based on fossil energy, coal, oil and gas, and only 15% based on non-carbon sources, nuclear, hydro and renewable. There's extreme urgency, and countries were giving their pledges after the Paris Agreement, and so far the progress hasn't been good enough that we would move towards 1.5 or 2 degrees target. So there's clearly a need for much higher ambition level to reach even 2 degrees targets.
While forests can soak up heat-trapping gases from the atmosphere, desertification and deforestation can amplify warming due to loss of vegetation cover and soil erosion. Measures to cut emissions, such as the production of biofuels, biochar made from biomass, as well as planting trees, will also increase demand for land conversion. Reducing deforestation and forest degradation could result in a reduction of between 0.4 to 5.8 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. For years, herders have grazed their lands in Al-Gelhak, a remote town in northern South Sudan. The attraction of lush pastoral lands fed by the rainy season entices the pastoralists to travel long distances with their animals. However, over time, disagreements have developed between the pastoral Arab and Fatala communities, as well as between pastoralists and their host communities.
The resolutions that we agreed upon and passed, if followed and implemented, then there won't be any problem again from our side as nomads. So the resolution is a witness between us and our brothers in South Sudan.
Conflicts happen as a result of the cows crossing into our farm and destroying our crops. If the cows move out of our farms, we won't have a problem because the crops are what we survive on. And that's where the conflict starts and people start to fight.
Since 2017, regional and local authorities, supported by the United Nations mission in South Sudan, have been engaging the pastoral and host communities to resolve their differences. So recently, farmers and nomadic pastoralists in South Sudan's northern Upper Nile state signed an agreement to share land and water point in Al-Gelhag, following long-standing disagreement and frequent conflict over land and water in the area. The community members made the agreement after attending a cross-border migration conference in July.
How can we coexist? It is only when there is security and by protecting yourselves. Then it is your responsibility. If any problem arises between you, the pastoralist, and the defender, which is the host community, don't shoot and don't create any problem with them.
The agreement aims to resolve a number of contentious issues, including reducing taxes charged by the host communities, vaccinations for the pastoralist animals, respect for the norms and traditions of host communities by the nomadic tribes, ensuring grazing is conducted in designated areas, and the formation of a peace committee to prevent further conflict.
Together, we shall continue to work and make sure that we achieve peaceful intercommunal relations between the nomads, the visiting nomads from Sudan, and the local host community in South Sudan, in northern Upper Nile state specifically.
If respected, the agreement will allow the age-old seasonal migratory exodus of the nomadic pastoralist Arabs and the Fatala families to continue. But their movements will be controlled and monitored by South Sudanese authorities to reduce conflict. The local community will also continue to benefit, buying cows, sheep, goats, and milk from the herding community. In the Lake Chad region, where climate change and shortages of water and food that come from it is becoming increasingly linked to conflict. The drastic shrinking of Lake Chad by more than 90% since the 1960s has led to environmental degradation, social economic marginalization and insecurity affecting 45 million people. Exacerbated competition over scant resources and the vicious cycle of risk and vulnerability have decreased the resilience of populations to cope with humanitarian crises. Declining economic activity and agricultural loss have led to a lack of employment opportunities across the region. The resulting socio-economic marginalization has exposed populations in the area, in particular the young people, to the risk of violent extremism and provided breeding ground for recruitment by groups such as Boko Haram.
Climate change affects peace and security in indirect but no less serious ways. In the Sahel and the Sudan, for instance, climate change has heightened competition for diminishing land, forage, and water resources, fueling tensions between herders and farmers. In the Lake Chad Basin, climate change contributes to unpredictable rainfall patterns that impede traditional livelihood options, compound socioeconomic exclusion, and reduce the opportunity costs of joining armed groups. Climate-related displacement has also become an acute problem. Frequent and longer droughts in Somalia have been a major factor in the displacement of more than 2.6 million people, which in turn have increased local tensions as well as human trafficking, child exploitation, and recruitment by armed groups.
In Africa, crop destruction from the fall-arming worm, strong droughts induced by an abnormally strong El Nino cycle, and a rise in conflict in places such as Nigeria, Somalia, and South Sudan were the chief culprit in a serious rise in food insecurity in 2017. At the peak of the El Nino crisis from 2014 to 2016, some 40 million people in Africa required emergency assistance. The number dropped to around 26 million in 2017.
I think a lot starts with communicating about the economics of climate change. So when you discuss with the Ministry of Agriculture how climate change affects food systems, food prices, it's good to have data. It's good to have economic data from the past, as much as what climate change models tell you about agriculture in the future. And then you need to link that data with money. It's eventually a big hit that Argentina is taking. It's a big hit that the US is taking through the storms. So everyone is affected, but unless you can translate it into US dollar figures, very often there is not enough attention on the issue.
As a designated financial mechanism of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Global Environment Facility continues to be at the forefront of international efforts to strengthen developing countries' resilience to climate change.
We came to realize that the projects that we are financing are good projects for the most part. They deliver generally the objectives that they were supposed to do, but they are not adding up. They are not helping to transform the systems that need transformation in order for us to reach these targets. So in this cycle, we developed a new policy through which we can bring resources closer together and start designing projects and programs that speak across different sectors and speak across different themes. So when you're talking about biodiversity, you have to talk about land use and how agriculture is taking place at the landscape scale. When you talk about emissions, we know that between 25 and 40% of all emissions today are due to deforestation added with agriculture. So without that, we won't achieve the results. So we decided to integrate more the financing that we provide.
The Global Environment Facility Small Grant Program successfully showed that community-based groups established to share common experiences and concerns about climate change lead to better and more resilient practices. But all too often, projects need trained, experienced, and motivated implementation staff for effective design and implementation of adaptation measures. Weak project planning, financial management, and reporting are other factors leading to implementation gaps.
LDCs have special needs and capacity sometimes it's not there. Of course, we work through accredited agencies, and they should know all the details on how applications work and what is eligible, what not eligible.
An overall focus on sustainability, coupled with early action, offers the best chances to tackle climate change. This could entail low population growth and reduced inequalities, improved nutrition, and lower food waste. This could enable a more resilient food system and make more land available for bioenergy, while still protecting forests and natural ecosystems. However, without early action in these areas, more land will be required for bioenergy, leading to challenging decisions about food land use and food security.
Land is where we live. Land is under growing human pressure, and land is part of the solution, but land cannot do it all.
But overall, the IPCC says that land must remain productive to maintain food security as the population increases and the negative impacts of climate change on vegetation increase. This means there are limits to the contribution of land to addressing climate change. For instance, through the cultivation of energy crops and afforestation. It also takes time for trees and soils to store carbon effectively. Bioenergy needs to be carefully managed to avoid risks to food security, biodiversity, and land degradation. But experts say desirable outcomes will depend on locally appropriate policies and governance systems. That's our program for the day. Thank you for watching. Our inbox, earthfile@channelstv.com, is available for your comments and questions. You can also view this episode on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/channelsweb. Do click the playlist menu and then click Earthfile. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the Earthfile crew here in Lagos, it's bye for now.